Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the show. On this episode, I'm exploring what motivates people to take action and push boundaries. And my guest, I'm delighted to say, is Dr. Hemma Lomax. Hemma is someone I've been wanting to get on the show for ages, and I'm delighted I've now managed to do so. She's had a really interesting career spanning both the UK and the US, having worked as a barrister, a parliamentary counsel with the SEC, and in-house for major corporations like Disney and Snapchat. Hemma describes herself as nosy and greedy, but in the best possible way. And she's driven by deep curiosity about human behaviour, passion for uncovering answers to big questions. In this episode, we explore her unique perspective on compliance, ethics, leadership, and experimentation. We explore how she's used curiosity to try and break into the rooms where it happens, and how she's reframed traditional approaches to compliance by focusing on storytelling, curiosity, and the hero's journey. Hemma shares lessons from her career, her approach to empowering others as a guide rather than a hero, and her new podcast, Unless, which seeks to inspire action by learning from people who operationalize good intentions, scale. Whether you're in compliance, leadership, or just someone who's curious about how we can influence others for the better, there'll be something in this conversation for you. So get ready for an engaging, thought-provoking discussion filled with wisdom, humour, and plenty of insights. It's my discussion with Dr. Hemma Lomax on the edge of the possible. Hemma, welcome to the Human Risk Podcast.
Thank you, Christian. I'm so happy to be here with you.
I am so excited to have you here because we got to know each other a few years ago, and then we spoke a bit and we really got on, and then we kind of went off and did stuff, and now we've recently reconnected, having been observers of each other's stuff on social media, and you've got a fascinating career. I wouldn't even know where to start if I was trying to summarize it. So how about you have a go at just give my listeners a little pen portrait of yourself?
Well, so I've got a UK career and a US career, and the highlight of my UK career, I've got to say, is the wig-wearing barrister. You know, the horsehair wig, standing up in court. I also moved to parliamentary counsel, which was another fabulous experience, being able to be in Parliament. But then I really decided that I needed to work in corporate law. I didn't even take corporate law school, but I decided that money rules the world, and we might as well go where people have influence. So I explored going to the FSA at the time, and I was looking at the Bribery Act, which was being drafted while I was at parliamentary counsel. And then I noticed that the US were a little bit ahead when it came to anti-corruption work. So that's what drove me to explore coming to the US and working for the Securities and Exchange Commission. Of course, I had designs on learning a bit and coming back home, but then, life happens, married someone, have 2 children here, and here I've been here like 15 years now. So I did about 11 years at the SEC, and then I moved into the corporations themselves. I was like, why do you want to be on the bit where you're dealing with crisis? Why not be inside with these big brands that care, that have reputations on the line and might put some resources behind doing the right thing, whatever that might be. So I got pulled into Disney, so not a bad start for big.
I love this.
My children were very happy, as you can imagine. I've got 2 little girls, so they were very happy. From there, when they grew up a little bit, they were very happy that I moved to Snapchat. Again, social media is a thing where you really want to see what they can do because they've got big brands. And then my last role was at Zendesk, a customer service software place, again, trying to lead a function globally to see how they can scale their compliance operations. So I've had lots of fun experiences. I'm in transition right now and also dabbling with being an entrepreneur consultant. So I'm having a lot of fun.
One of the things I love about you is that there's this sense of energy and this kind of like, I'm just, and take this the right way, childlike curiosity about what's going on. And there's sort of this inquisitive, I want to find out what's happening and just explore a little bit. And so Disney's a very logical place to go do that. But I love this enthusiasm for discovery, because if I looked at typically what is, compliance and the law, very dry subject, and you're one of those people that just approaches it all with a sense of excitement and wanting to know more. And so that feels very much at odds. But for me, it's very much aligned in the sense that, it comes back to that. We're trying to influence people. We're trying to understand people. And so to do that, we have to be curious.
100%. I mean, curiosity is the driving force. I call myself nosy and greedy, which is probably pretty accurate, but underneath that it's a quest. Quite frankly, it's a quest. And it's, without trying to sound too cliched, I'm trying to burst open these doors for the rooms where it happens to see what's happening. Quite frankly, I've got some big questions. I'm like, how is this allowed to happen? I lived probably a lot of years, decades in outrage at certain things, war or mass transit accidents. I remember as a child seeing these things on the news saying, what, huh, how, and why? And so a lot of the decisions I've made, I did a PhD in international humanitarian law. I worked at the United Nations. I was looking for the rooms where people were apparently supposed to be answering these questions and making a difference. And so that's really been what's behind the curiosity. I've learned a ton. I'm not sure I've got any of the answers, but I'm definitely closer. And I think this is one of the reasons I was attracted to you and your work is like I'm definitely closer to understanding human behavior or at least understanding human behavior is where it's at, right? And that I should make that my new quest because of course, what's the common denominator in all of those doors and behind all of those walls? It's humans and human behavior, human decision making in the moment. Um, I've learned a lot recently about our subconscious and the human survival brain, or call it the saboteur brain. So lots of things that interest me. And yeah, I'm gonna be keeping an eye on where the answers might lie because I'm sure they're out there somewhere.
And that takes us very nicely to Unless, which is your podcast. But I think I would argue also your philosophy. So tell us about the show and then the philosophy that underpins it, because I think that's the sort of essence of you from what I can see.
Oh, yeah. So thank you. I got to start a new podcast, my second podcast this summer called Unless. And the word unless comes from the Dr. Seuss book, The Lorax. And the quote is, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. And the reason I wanted to do that, back to curiosity, was to meet people that are operationalizing their good intentions at scale in very different areas, not just law, not just compliance, but anything. So I've got, veterans, I've got people that the gentleman that was the head of the Joint Armed Forces in the UK, the prosecution arm. I'm trying to make sure I have a variety of guests, but really what I've learned is this is a Tony Robbins quote, I think, success leaves clues. And so why not try to learn from the masters? Why not try to see what these people were thinking, these people that were actually able to make a difference and impact a number of people for the good? What made a difference? I also learned, by the way, failure leaves clues. And oftentimes in these stories, there are lots and lots of what they would define as failures. And they learned probably much more from the times where they couldn't than the times when they could. So that's been really powerful for me too, as well, to understand personally, be brave, don't be afraid to fail because sometimes the best lessons are there. But also you have to kind of move to the edge of possibility and see what's possible. And I know I've used that phrase with you a lot. It's exciting to see the human potential. And it's exciting to see what we can achieve if we put our minds together. So that's what Unless is about. It's really a way for me to be nosy and greedy again, access people that have been doing amazing things. You can't do it all yourself in a lifetime, but you certainly can learn from others that have gone before you. And that's what Unless the podcast has given me. And I'm so grateful to say that you are a guest on Unless the podcast and we'll be publishing yours soon. So thank you for joining me there.
No, thanks for having me. So I've got two thoughts. So the first one is you were talking about being nosy and greedy. I suddenly thought, is she working? Are these like the seven dwarfs? And then I was like, but then I'd have to add in sleepy and grumpy. So let's not get on that one. But that just
Sleepy and grumpy show up. They do show up from time to time, but
but I love this idea of just not being constrained. And the thing I think is interesting is that we see lots of examples in the world of people who are not constrained, who perhaps should be. So if I think back to, those TV singing competitions, right? The people that cannot sing, right? Undeniably cannot, and still decide to go forward, right? Living their dream.
No, I disagree with you there. I try to tell my children, so I've got a husband that laughs hysterically when my children are singing. And I try to remind him and my children, the singing is not about singing well. Singing is about enjoying singing, and everyone should have a voice. So maybe they don't need to be subjecting the public to them on national TV. Fair.
Well, yeah, and that's my point, right? Is I think there's a sort of like, if you want to do something because it gives you joy, right? Providing no one else is getting harmed, crack on, right? As far as I'm concerned, and there should be that. The bit that bothers me about those shows is, and of course you need them for the entertainment value, right? But I sort of sit there, and the one that bothers me is particularly those where you've got people whose parents and friends have told them that they have a talent that they clearly don't have. I'm like, the people that should be helping and calling this stuff out, right? And saying, great, keep singing, but maybe find an alternative career path. So what I think is interesting is that when we look at the world, we absolutely need people to have crazy imaginations and wild dreams and, pushing boundaries. And I think, that's when amazing things happen. But what's fascinating is you've come through what one might term a sort of very traditional approach where that isn't necessarily valued, right? The law is not the first place I think of. I mean, there are certain law firms and lawyers that behave in a renegade manner, but the mainstream bit that you've done, you've got some pretty established names there. You weren't sort of operating on the edges of this. It's quite, in a way, it sort of surprises me because you would think that that would make you more conformist. And yet the language that you use is all around freedom and exploration. And I just think it's really interesting to have somebody that's gone into that traditional career path, yet with a vision of this broader piece of I need to push the boundaries.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So as you say that, there's a couple of themes there. Thinking back to the person on, Britain's Got Talent or whatever it is that isn't really talented.
Britain doesn't have talent.
Britain might not have talent. What I see there, and this is my typical, Hemmer glass half full, is others should see that and say, well, if that person can get on a stage, there's no reason I can't, right? And that's very much just the theme here. It's like, when I talk about the edge of possibility, I wasn't supposed to be a lawyer. I mean, my mum will tell the story. She was born in Uganda. She came to the UK with £5 in her pocket. All odds against us, not even speaking the language. So you could say, oh gosh, Hemma had it hard. Hemma wasn't very, rich when she was young. I think we were rich by many standards. But actually, what I saw was, well, gosh, if my mum could do what she did with that little, what are my excuses? So that was the driving force. And that's what made me think, well, push your way into a legal career, push your way into being a barrister. It's difficult to be a barrister in the UK. I did 27 interviews before I got my first pupillage. And I think to myself, I could have stopped at 20 and decided it wasn't possible. But again, I had lots of examples around me of, well, gosh, other people are doing that. Why can't I try? And that theme, it's not about what Hemma did or didn't achieve, because my decisions are, vague as whatever. They're quite random, some of them. But what it tells me is when you put your mind to it, everything's possible. So then the big question is, well, what should we put our mind to? And that's where I get to, well, what about, world-saving problems? What about the way people live and the survival? What about pain? What about suffering? What could we do to alleviate that if we put our mind to it? So those have been how the questions have developed. It's not just a case of, I took a traditional route that was safe. For me, it wasn't safe. But for me, at least at the time, I thought, and I was wrong in many ways, I thought those people in positional power would be able to do something. That was the thought.
And you've talked to me a lot about some of the constructs that we have, for example, for storytelling. And so we've talked about the hero's journey and some of this, and that plays very much into your thinking. Talk a little bit about that and why that matters to you, because if I think about storytelling, it gives you patterns to follow, and you're somebody that doesn't follow traditional patterns the whole way through. You sort of do for a bit, and then you're designing your own one. And I'm fascinated by that fascination with storytelling, but also how that fits into your personal decision making.
Yes. Oh, so interesting. So look, going to Disney is about storytelling. I was very much attracted to that and the power of storytelling. In fact, I had a guest on, Les, June Benjamin, who talks about mining ancestral stories for peace intelligence, in the ancestral practice of passing down stories. Yes, you can hear about war, you can hear about suffering, but between the lines, there's also different types of heroes, different types of peace intelligence. I also think about those disasters I saw on television where, it might be a plane crash, it might be a bus crash, it might be a terrorist attack. And my mother would say, look for the helpers, because in that scene, there was always a helper as well. So I think a lot about storytelling. I actually attended a 3-day course recently with Andrew Corden on stages and how to speak. And he introduced this very simple concept to me of the hero, the villain, and the guide, right? And why do we think about that? Oftentimes when we're trying to sell something, we might position ourselves as the hero. My product will save your problems. My product will help you. And the person you're selling to inadvertently becomes the villain, right? They couldn't do it without you. They need you. And he really said, well, if you're going to be selling, what you really want to be doing is thinking of yourself as the guide, thinking of maybe the pain that your customer is dealing with as the villain, but your customer is the hero. And you really need to think about unlocking that heroism in their life. That made me think of, oh yes, of course, Harry Potter, right? Dumbledore is not the hero. Dumbledore is the guide. Harry Potter is the hero in that, and the villain of maybe Voldemort, whoever it is. But the idea is that we don't always have to be the hero in other people's lives. We have to think about how we can guide that and how we can unlock the talent that might be in them. So that really resonated with me. And as you said, I think of that in my personal life, in my personal role as a compliance officer. I will do much better if I think of my employees as the heroes in their own journey and the heroes in their own story. And all I can do, therefore, is if at all, I can guide them along that journey, if I've got a role at all. The villain shouldn't be me. I shouldn't make myself the villain. You must do this or else. And I shouldn't make them the villain. You're an insider threat. I'm worried about you. It doesn't even have to be the rule that's the villain. It just has to be, human frailty or, we get busy and we turn the blind eye, or we have blind spots. Those are the villains. But together we can do hard things well. So certainly, I use that phrase a lot. Together we can do hard things well with ease and peace of mind. But embedded in that is that point that we can't come and save anyone, right? Everyone has the ability to save themselves. But with that curiosity that you talked about, with recognizing that success leaves clues, I might be a guide, not even based on my own experience, but everything I'm learning from my guests on LS or the masters that I'm reading about. So there's like this lifelong thirst for knowledge and mastery has shown me that I've got many guides and that my legacy might be becoming a guide for others. And that's the only way I'm going to be making any impact at scale in my time.
I love that because this is not what you said at all. This seems like a weird flight of fancy, but I was thinking back to, like people issuing parking tickets.
Mm.
And it becomes this kind of like, you are a bad parker. I'm going to issue a ticket and I'm going to heroically on behalf of the society issue. And it becomes this antagonist. And all I could sort of think about was like, you're right. It's kind of like, it's really easy if you're in a position of implementing rules or in a senior management position to kind of like, I'm doing the good thing here. And then I'm trying to control these bad people doing awful things or who might do awful things. I don't know. So I'm just going to assume that they're all up to no good. And I really like that reframing of the narrative because I think then that, we almost need a new paradigm to look at things. And I think when we look at the way society has intervened, the way rules have been set up, and we can see that now in the sort of backlash into ridiculous bureaucracy and overbearing health and safety regulations, all these kinds of things, is that's done on and I guess lots of the sort of, patriarchal society is all set up around this premise of we know what's best and you, the little people, will do what you're told.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not to say it's all bad, but that creates some dynamics that are unhealthy and don't allow people to flourish. And so I love this idea of saying, okay, we need to shift things, but it's quite helpful to have a framework within which to think about the world. And I love that idea of the hero, the villain, and because I think that gives you, that's uncontroversial in the sense that we all know it from fairy tales.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love this idea of taking something like that as a means of looking at the world, as opposed to here's Hemma's formulaic framework that she has evolved over decades. Just like it's not very appealing and not very interesting. What you've talked about is a visceral engagement. And we need, I think, things that are very strong to help us navigate some of these choppier waters that we've got at the moment.
Well, yeah, choppy waters indeed. I mean, one of the things I share with every guest in preparation for Unless and telling my secrets now is the hero's journey, that picture, the hero's journey or the heroine's journey. That I think actually, if you look at Disney movies, that's what they used to, right? Every journey, there's a call to action, an abyss, a cave that you have to climb out of. There's probably a sidekick that is your guide, but oftentimes that's what you need to have recognize that humans are going through, right? And that's not something I figured out. That's something that's time immemorial. That's humans. Right? We have to go through these things. And the hero and the villain can be in your own head, quite frankly. Back to that survival brain, you could call it a survival brain because it's trying to protect you. Of course it is. But then in certain places, you've got these imprints that you take into different situations where they're just not relevant. And we've got to try and, what do they call them? Limiting beliefs. We've got to try and undo these limiting beliefs or undo these presumptions we've made or these fears that we've had that make us act one way or another. I like to say very boldly, very simply, that insecurity is the most dangerous thing in the world. Why? Because I think below many of the things that we worry about, you can probably track insecurity on there. Somebody didn't do something for fear of losing something, or somebody did something for fear of losing something. Or we've got to really think about those things actually being within us and that they are conquerable. So what a beautiful framing to say, I could be the hero in my own story. I might be being the villain in my own story. And if I look to people that have gone before me, they could be the guides. Very simple, but quite powerful on every level. And that works again, at work. Obviously, I think of myself as a parent as well. So, certain point in time, my children were very young. I had to be the hero. I had to keep them alive. But that I have to evolve into somebody that is just a guide and lets them have their own journey so that my children can be the hero in their own story and they can recognize the villain, whether it's internal or external, and make decisions. Well, that sounds very simple. Parenting is not easy, but it's a good framework for me. Every time I want to step in now, my children are 6 and 9. It's the perfect time where you want to still step in and they want to stop you stepping in. And I can see that friction. I've got to remind myself, you are not the hero in their story, right? They have to be the guide. So again, we could go on all day about that, but you can see the application in something as simple as parenting or complex as parenting. I'm beginning to see it at work, whether as a compliance professional or a leader. Let's think about leadership as well. This idea of trusting and inspiring your team to use their own brain and think for themselves. You have to be the guide there. You cannot be telling them what to do. We all know about the scourge of micromanaging our employees. I was lucky. The first large team I got as a corporate executive was a team I really didn't know much about what they knew about. I was very lucky because I had no danger of micromanaging them. My only way to survive as their leader was to trust them and give them ease and peace of mind and learn from them. And that was a great start for a big team. I can see that had I been given a team that did what I had done, my insecurities might have made me want to tell them what to do my way and bristle when they didn't.
I love that. I think there's so mmany things to unpack. But the final thing you said really resonates with me because I had the same thing when I came into the regulator, heading up this department. It's like by default, I've never been a regulator. Well, not strictly true, but I've never done the thing I was doing. And so you're right. As you sort of look around, you can't take control. I mean, you could try, but you'd fail pretty quickly, and you realize that. So I love that idea of actually that's quite a powerful teacher because that sense of micromanagement, it's just not an option. And so I love that idea of thinking about it, of going, okay, because I was in a situation where that wasn't possible. I evolved one way, but the temptation's there, right? It's like I'm responsible
Temptation
for
is
the things
there.
that go on.
Yeah, look, I've seen it also with teaching. So I was, again, I say I was lucky. Part of being nosy and greedy, I did a PhD very early on and then got into teaching very early on. And then I was sent out to teach people. And oftentimes I'd walk into the classroom and people would say, when's the teacher arriving? And I'd have to explain that I was the actual teacher. Many of my students were older than me. And even if they weren't, they were my same age. But what, again, needs must. I couldn't pretend that I had years and years of experience and knowledge to bestow upon them. And so I didn't start with that insecurity. I thought, well, okay, it's obvious you don't. So you have to sit there and pretend you do. But what else was I going to do with the time? Like, I was trusted to teach these people. I'll give you an example where I had to teach fire professionals about courtroom skills. And I thought, well, what do I know about what these people are dealing with in the field? And that was a great invitation for myself to ask myself, well, who does know? Oh, you know what? Who does know? They know. Okay. Curiosity into the classroom, having more questions than answers, and then guiding them to whatever they said. I wasn't afraid. Whatever they said, I knew would map on to what I was brought to teach, right? Because whatever they do, they could end up in court one day, right? So let me hear about the sorts of things you're involved in, and let's put them to the test under a cross-examination. Let's do it. And it was very, again, serendipitous, because I guarantee you, if I started teaching at the age of I am at now, my late 40s, I might think I've got something to tell people. I might think it's knowledge transfer, but it really isn't knowledge transfer. It's really about unlocking what's in the students themselves. And of course, they were so engaged because they were talking about their journey, not some canned journey that I brought in to tell them they had to do to pass the test. So yeah, again, I've been lucky. Again, part of it is being nosy and greedy and putting myself in situations where I was pretty brave. But once there, you have the opportunity to try something different or ask yourself, well, what would make sense in these circumstances? And look, I will be honest with you, there were times where I felt very nervous and hid behind the lectern, put on a quick video and went down and thought, what are you going to do now? But, going through that, failure breeds success. As I said, failure leaves clues. And I feel like I learned so much in those early days of teaching that I've now been able to bring here. So when I'm told I'm entitled training, I like to kind of bust through it and say, that canned LMS, mandatory training that we do cannot be what we call training. Let's call it something else. Let's call it that checkbox thing you have to do, and then let's get to the real conversations.
And I love that idea of, the word canned is absolutely perfect, right? That is exactly what it is. Right? I'm going to tell you the way the world is, and you can sort of see there might be an evolutionary logic of that thing of sort of going, okay, well, if we're operating in an environment where we don't, nothing much changes and therefore experience is valuable, maybe me coming with an example that's the greatest hits of all the things I've ever experienced, right? And I'm teaching you stuff is useful. But I think in the modern world, with the dynamics that we have, with things like technology that are upending things, with social changes being what they are, I think, it's much better, as you say, to not approach these things as like I am the wise teacher and you are all the idiot pupils. And by the end of it, you will have 5% of my knowledge and I think it's a really dangerous model. And we always start with those, back at school where you've got the kind of like, if you listen to me, you will learn what's going on. Those dreadful teachers, right? That's sort of like, the gospel has just walked in. It's going to tell you what's wrong, and it's going to walk out again. And I love that idea of engaging and thinking and learning. And I see so many examples, and I think people are now being busted on this, of people frankly phoning it in, right? Rocking up, just rinse and repeat the same old crap. And I think if you're in front of an audience, you owe it to them to engage them. And you have to read the room, work out, and it becomes a collaborative experience. And if you're not learning anything by doing it, then why are you there as well?
Well, I mean, that's the other thing Andrew Corden made very clear is you're there to make connection. I mean, literally just that, not just connection for the sake of it, connection with the actual humans that have turned up in the room in front of you, right? Like it's not, and today's audience is not tomorrow's audience or last week's audience. And so that's really whether you do it naturally or you do it, if you, I don't know if I do it naturally or if I plan for it, but certainly that is my only objective in the room is to make connection and inspire as opposed to teach, right? Like inspire. And I used to say about law school, for example, I didn't learn the answers to the laws in law school. I learned how to find the answers. I learned how to think. And that's really what we need. And look, when we had those monotonous teachers that went on, I spent the whole hour in my own head. Right? So I was listening and thinking. And so it still worked for me because I had to think. But if I was just trying to pass the test, you know what? I can do that with some question and answers at the end of the year. And I often did. I often just, did the exam through some test papers, test preparation. I did the whole New York bar using test preparation because I didn't need to just download information for the sake of it. One of the most fun things to do is to see light bulbs go on in the audience and see people thinking. And you don't have any ownership on where they go with those thoughts, right? All you can do is inspire. So yeah, I that's definitely my intention when I get in front of an audience. And it's those people that I've listened to and learned from that have made me think that I will keep coming back to. Andrew Corden's one of them. Tony Robbins is another. You're another. Like really just people that don't have the ego of being content driven necessarily, but they're actually showing that there's another way to think. And I know we've talked about your examples. One of the things you say in your book is about not teaching people how to do behavioral science or what to do with their employees, but realizing there may be another way. And they just have to ask, what other ways can we do this? What have we been doing that we've been thinking is logical and status quo that actually could be evolved by now, right? So yeah, I mean, that's what I want from my audience. That's what I enjoy from you and others.
And it's fascinating when you talk. I love it, by the way. It just chimes exactly with the way I. Well, for me, there's a fundamental difference between teaching someone first aid, where there is there is a right way to do first aid and a wrong way to do first aid, and even that evolves over time. But generally speaking, you're going to do a first aid course, right? There is some stuff you have to specifically learn exactly what it is you need to do, and there are certain things in life where that's the case. But the sort of stuff that you and I are involved in, we don't have a monopoly on the right answer. In fact, we may not even have the right answer at all, right? We might have completely the wrong answer. And it's about unleashing something. And I think that requires a very different way of looking at it. And I think when we look at, some of the compliance topics, yes, sure, there are going to be hard and fast rules that you need people to follow, like the first aid model. But there's other things where you just go, I need you just to be alive to the dynamics that are here, right? Stuff regulators care about, stuff that matters, things that may not be immediately apparent to you in the moment that we need to dress rehearse in some way, shape or form so that you're aware of them, but you're going to have to work this out for yourself. And I think that's particularly as we look at things like, knowledge used to be power. Now we've all got knowledge at our fingertips. And so what is it we're transmitting to people and what we're spending our time doing? And I think that we mustn't use the old school methodologies for that. That requires the kind of thinking you're talking about.
Right. I mean, look, there's knowledge and then there's wisdom, right? And so we can transfer knowledge all day, but wisdom is the act of doing something with that knowledge and using it in context and having situational awareness. One example of that might be, it doesn't matter how much I try to inspire an employee to think. If they are they're laboring under the impression that they have no room to think because they've been told by their boss they must do it a certain way, or their incentives are set so it seems like everyone should be doing it the way we've always done it, it's very hard to get through to them. What I'm looking for is independent thought, right? So I'll give you another example of that. Back to the fire service in Scotland. I learned when I was there, I didn't know this until I got there, that in order to have, at least at the time, you needed two separate pieces of evidence to corroborate a fact in a criminal trial. Don't know if that's the same way, two separate pieces. And so what we'd learn was you'd have these officers get together after an incident and write their statements together, but they go to court and those would be two separate pieces. And so you can imagine as a cross-examining defense barrister, I'm like, brilliant. I can show that this is actually one piece of evidence. But when you'd ask the officers why, right, under cross-examination, why did they sit there and go line for line together with their colleague, even knowing that you need two separate pieces of evidence? They would say, because that's how we always do it. Or that's how my boss told me to do it. Or that's how I was trained to do it. And what I really was trying to unlock there, because it was a mock classroom, it wasn't anything significant. It was like, well, independent thought will do you well. And when you're on your own in the witness stand under oath, the cross-examination will be the acid test of the way you've chosen to do things along the way. And we all know that saying to a jury, because that's how we've always done it, or because my boss said I should do it isn't going to work. So I love this idea of cross-examination being the acid test of your personal individual decisions and your capacity to think independently. And what we really like in hindsight was for someone to say, boss, this doesn't make sense given X, Y, and Z. And the boss obviously to think of that as a gift and say, wow, I'm so glad you alerted me to that. That was my blind spot. Let's do this differently. That's the purpose of that. And even a rough cross-examination in court, it's not about winning or losing. That's what we should be learning from that cross-examination. We should be learning, there's an opportunity to not be embarrassed again. No, that's not the point. To do it right next time. And thank goodness I was cross-examined, so I won't do it wrong again.
I love that formulation, because you and I have talked before about one of the things I find really frustrating is whenever I talk about US compliance, I immediately get asked what do prosecutors think.
Yes.
In other words, we need to make sure that whatever we're doing will stand up in court or in front of the regulator, whatever it is, right, in the legal process. And that, in my experience, has typically led to people doing things that are not very imaginative, right? That are exactly defensive decision making. We'll do what everybody else is doing so we don't look unusual. We rigidly stuck to the protocol because that's justifiable. We've done the thing that we've always done. Right? I'm not doing anything unusual or weird here. But I like the formulation you've just put on it is a far healthier one, I think, which leads you to say, okay, the cross-examination thing isn't about did you tick all the boxes? It's about saying, what were you thinking? Right?
Right.
Why were you doing it in that particular way? And I think if we framed it that way, then we started to look at it's much more of a qualitative assessment as opposed to a box ticky, have you followed this particular protocol? And so I love that articulation. And something I kind of want to hear more of, because I think typically when we talk about prosecutors, it is like, can you defend this? Like, have you done it by the book? But what you've talked about is maybe the book is wrong. Right? And actually we need to use common sense.
100%. Look, there are times when, as an internal in-house compliance officer, I've said to my business partners, look, if the rule is outrageous in practice, let's lobby for it to change. Why not? But let's not just be blind to this and say, well, we can't. Like, obviously, today it's the law and we have to follow it.
Right.
But if you feel strongly that this is absurd in the practice, I guarantee you there are regulators that would love that feedback. Now, that's refreshing, because all of a sudden I'm saying the law isn't king, right? Actually, your intelligence at source on the ground in the field is very helpful. And there's nothing wrong with us transferring one to the other. I think that's really important. The other piece I've seen, I was a regulator for 11 years in the US. I've also prosecuted and defended in the UK. I will say, my experience is that the regulators behind the closed doors, I can't speak for the SEC, but I can say they are there with the same missions and goals that we are, right? Like, think about the SEC. It's got 3 missions, a tripartite mission. Yes, they want to protect investors, but they also want capital formation. They want healthy capital formation in functioning markets. So really, their goals are exactly the same. And a prosecutor that doesn't get too much in the ego of winning and losing will want to find ways to do these things correctly. And I've worked with regulators that really come in curious, humble and curious, especially if you think about the things that are new, like AI, crypto. Like, there's a lot of things that a regulator can't possibly understand. They're like me when I was in my 20s asked to teach family law and I'd never even studied it. That's who they are, right? So those that come in curious will do really well to partner with the private sector. And there are lots of public-private sector partnerships that go on over here. But in the spirit of let's learn together, right? Let's do a hard thing well together. But you're right. Lots of us use the phantom prosecutor. And I kind of think, well, let's just pause for a second. You quoting what the federal government wants. How do you know what the federal government? I was a prosecutor. They're just people like me. And you don't know who you're going to get. And on the other side, I'd have people come to me with an attitude when I was prosecuting. And the last prosecutor said X, Y, and Z, I could have this much time. And I would say very unkindly, I'm not bound by the incompetence of my predecessors. Very rude. But what I'm saying there is, well, that's a tall story, but if it's true, I'm not bound to follow what you say they did. Here I am, deal with me. And that sounds kind of, again, a bit aggressive, but what I'm really saying there is, hello, we're in front of each other. Let's figure out what makes sense here. But what's not going to be persuasive to me is what someone else did, or what you think the prosecutors want, because you know how diverse the prosecutors are. I mean, honestly, one of the reasons I couldn't stay in the criminal defense bar was because I couldn't tolerate just how unfair it could be, right? And all the different excesses of, human excesses of ego, or mistakes that were made or following processes that no longer made sense for the participants, I decided that couldn't, it wasn't going to be if I can't beat it, I'll join them. Because if I can't beat it, I'll go out, I'll go to the legislature and see how I can change it. So I'm very defiant in that way, but really in the spirit of independent thought will get us there, because the only people you need to think about are the people in front of you right now and who you'll impact, right? You need to think about the situation you're in, not how we've always done it or what's always worked, because oftentimes, as I've explained, we can very quickly scratch the surface of that and say, well, that's ridiculous. And that makes no sense and it's not fit for purpose anymore. And yes, I know it's hard to undo things we've done forever, but you've got to start somewhere. What do they say? Take the first step. And just being allowed to recognize that, call it. You can vent, you can complain, but also ask the question, so what are we going to do about it now that we know that it's not working? That's beginning of something exciting.
And when you talk, I get this sense of, and it's a word I use about some of my thinking, so this is meant to be a compliment. There's a sense of mischief there.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Yeah. I mean, defiance, mischief, but it's magic almost. It's like, it's funny. My first black cat was called Mischief, which is funny that you say that, because one of my favorite names, there has to be a sense of mischief, because I don't want to be the person that's always critically analyzing and offering the devil's advocate position. That's not how I want to be. But certainly we have to be curious enough to ask ourselves self-reflective and therefore reflective questions on why we're doing things the way we're doing it. Now, that's a nice conversation to have in the abstract, but when you're seeing real pain and suffering, I feel like we're duty bound to ask it, right? Even if you wouldn't answer it in your lifetime, I think of it as a relay race. And I think I'm holding the baton right now while I'm alive. Let me do what I can in my part of the relay race to set the next one up for success. So yes, there might be some small problems, some big problems, but I've got to ask myself why. And it goes to the mundane. My daughter wasn't speaking to me the other night because I'd upset her and I didn't know why. And of course, I'm asking myself why, right? At the same time, trying to manage the way I handle that and not bully her into trying to tell me when she wasn't ready. Like, there's a lot we need to do there. So I think we need to take personal accountability for the way we respond in a certain situation. But there's nothing wrong, mischievous it may be, in asking why. And I think maybe the mischievous part is the answer to who do you think you are, Hemma, that might have an answer to this. Stay in your lane, stay in your place. And the mischievous part of me is I don't have a lane, I don't have a place, and I transcend these issues. And I don't think that I'm going to solve the world's problems on my own necessarily, but I do think I could play my part. And anyone that has made a difference had that mischievous streak where they were like, why not me? Why not us? Why not you?
And I think there's something as well about, even if the topic, and you can take this to ridiculous extremities, right? So I'm being sensible with this, but even if the thing that you're sort of railing against or asking questions about, whatever it is, right? Even if that's not necessarily that significant, I think it all forms part of the tapestry of the permission to challenge and the ability to ask questions. And so there's a little bit of me that sometimes will pursue things that are silly and a complete waste of, in the scheme of things, a waste of time. But as a matter of principle, either because I want to see what happens and I might learn something, or because I want other people around me to see that that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so, corporate examples would be, I might sit there in like a town hall type, sort of collective meeting thing and ask a slightly tricksy question with absolutely no interest whatsoever in the answer that comes back, probably because I know it's going to be nonsense. But because in the back of my mind, there's like, well, if I do this, maybe a junior member of staff who's got a way better question will at least see that somebody's role modeling, and we move away from this very performative, because you can end up with these things that feel a bit like sort of North Korean press conferences, if they have such a thing, where, it's like, we will present, and somebody says, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, thoroughly enjoying our pointless lowball question. And so I think sometimes role modeling that challenge, and this is massively self-serving, but I sometimes feel that that's important, and not least because sometimes I just want to practice. But I haven't challenged for a while. I need to keep that.
All of the things. I mean, it's a skill. There's a reason people don't do it. And again, if you just play that 7 whys game with yourself, this is wrong. I should say something. No, don't. Why not? Because the answers tend to be very uninspiring, right? Because you'll stand out. You'll label yourself as a complainer. You'll all these things, but no courage behind it. Right? So if you keep asking yourself the why you don't want to do it, you'll start to realize it's fundamentally based on insecurity. They're actually sometimes lies you're telling yourself, assumptions you're making about the way people will respond. if you say the thing. Or, I might just be wrong. What's wrong with being wrong? Like, I'd rather ask a question and be wrong than not have asked it and then regret not asking it, right? So there's that. Also, it doesn't have to be about, I love the modeling point. So definitely you have to do it out loud to model. But it doesn't always have to be out loud, right? You can just go, and I do this a lot, go down the train of thinking. And it works not just for what's going wrong, by the way, it works for what's going well. Like, if you see a meeting that just went really well and you feel amazing and you leave there, well, what happened in that meeting? Chances are it wasn't you, right? Somebody did something. And if you can unpack it, you might be able to replicate that and model that, right? So some of
it's
the
funny.
answers are in the room, good or bad. And again, maybe I could be neutral about it. Maybe it's not good or bad. Maybe it's just all lessons and all information. Similarly, like if you feel emotional about something, whether it's outrage or pride or whatever it might be, that's information. So I try to mine my informations, not my emotions, sorry, as information, and then think about what I can do with that. I know it must be quite scary to think about what my head is like because I'm constantly thinking. I speak faster and I think faster than I speak, but it really does. It does take me to some wild places, which is kind of fun.
I was giggling because you were talking about, maybe it wasn't me that the reason that I'm not the reason the meeting went well. I've seen that. Okay, there's a number of meetings I've been in that, in spite of the fact that I was physically present, it still went okay. And I'm like, how did that happen? Because
Right.
but parking that, I think there's something really interesting about a head that is kind of like a pinball machine or fire. We pick your analogy, right? But there's lots going on. And I think that can lead to some dangerous things, right? We have people where there's lots going on where sort of, I'd rather they thought a little bit less. But I think in the case, when you're thinking in the way that you are and looking at the subjects that you're looking at, I think that's a really healthy place to come from. And I guess as you're talking, I'm thinking, well, in a way, the legal background and some of the experiences you've had equip you to be able to have those thoughts, right? Because you've got enough of an understanding about how the machine works. Because I think often, it's funny when I see people criticizing regulators, I kind of go, I get where you're coming from. I understand why you want to criticize that, but you have to understand why they are doing what they are doing, because your critique about the output is valid, absolutely. But you're coming at it from the wrong angle because you're missing the point as to why these things happen. And so having been inside the machine and understanding that and the logic that the machine uses and the pressures that are on the machine, I think is super helpful. And I suspect that probably, rather than, you would think logically that would dim down the fireworks or the pinball machine, whatever it is in your head, right? But actually that empowers it because you can start to have thoughts with a knowledge of, I guess if we were going to change this, right, it's a little bit harder because it's much easier to not know anything and to think you know loads. But bringing that in makes it a much more powerful combination.
100%. I mean, look, I like to frame it as radical compassion, radical curiosity, radical empathy, lots of radicals. Right? But and radical because it's hard, it's when it's hard to do those things that you must do them. And yeah, the legal system naturally, or the legal training naturally brings you into that because you'll do debate class and you'll take both sides of a debate. Or at least in the UK, when I was a barrister, you could be prosecuting in the morning and defending in the afternoon. That's quite uncommon in the US. But
I
there,
get that wrong.
yeah,
The reason I couldn't do
no, at least more,
is getting confused.
no, you're absolutely obviously not the same case, but you're high independent advocate.
I love that. That's a very North Korean model. Well, I was representing both sides.
Yeah, well, I mean, but look, the best, jokes aside, the best advocate should be thinking about both sides, right? Even if you want to win, that's the best way to win, is really to get in the mind of your opponent. But more to the point, if you can just step back and see the system for what it is and all the players as part of a bigger picture, you can have empathy with every single person on, every witness, every jury member, every defendant, every prosecutor. You can see what insecurities might be playing on them, and you can then, big picture, take it all in and see what might work. And I think that, again, legal training lends itself to that, because if you're doing that kind of legal training, obviously it depends what you're doing. But if you're coming out just to win and seeing, yourself as the hero and them as the villain, back to that, that formulation, you're only going to be giving yourself one perspective. But if you step back and hoping to be the guide and seeing what, getting back to Harry Potter and Voldemort, watch those scenes, right? Look for Voldemort's insecurities as well. Look for Harry's. Look for Voldemort's strengths. Look for Harry's. Look for what worked. I hope some of your listeners have watched this, because otherwise I'm talking to to nobody. But there is always something. Again, situational awareness. Look for the helpers around. Look for the insecurities. Look for the powers, because that's how you're going to unlock human abilities to deal with these things, right? That's where you're going to get the clues, both in the winning and the failures. So you're right. Legal training helps with that. We're encouraged to think that way up to a point. And what that does is back to that concept. Nothing's all good and nothing's all bad. There's lots to learn in both. So then you don't take the, the one road. Like, I live in, I'm in the ethics and compliance world. You expect me to be righteous and pious and tell you what needs to be done. But underneath that layer, you're asking humans to operate on those things. And so it's better to understand where our ethical blind spots might be, why people might do things despite their best intentions. You're going to have a lot more impact there than in this space where this crowd says they're good and these few are the outliers that are bad. Like, that's not helping anyone. So I like to try and take it all in and see where we can, again, use radical empathy, radical compassion, radical curiosity, because those three things are what really gets, and you know this in your profession, that's where you get to the human behind the story.
And we got a sense of who you are and what you're about. Talk a little bit about the either the big mission or the next mission, because you're clearly motivated to change things, right? Because all the language you've used is not about phoning it in, cranking the handle, just keep the ball rolling, right? It's about affecting change. But where's your current vision? Because my sense is it'll shift, right? You talked about your changing personality, so logically that would mean your vision. What's the sort of short and longer term visions for you? What is it you want to change?
Yeah, that's really an interesting question. When I was 16, I wanted to be Secretary General of the United Nations. So uh, watch this space. But really, the other thing I've been thinking about a lot this summer is it's not about what you do, it's who you are. And that's a pretty profound statement. But what that means is there's lots I can do. We can talk about what I want to do next. I'm happy to share that with you. At the same time, it's like, who am I and how am I showing up in the world is really important because, I had a friend once that told me there are problems to be solved at the local level too, Hemma. You don't need to go to the UN to solve them. And that's a very fair point. Like, it's not that the guides in the world are needed just at the United Nations or just in the C-suite or the boardroom. They're needed in the home. They're needed in the grocery store. They're needed, in the church, in the school. And so to the degree that I can, you said modeling, but more it's like live, be the change you want to be. Is it Michael Jackson or is it Gandhi? I'm not sure. Probably both. Be the change you want to see in the world. That's one thing. So I'm really trying to focus on that. Like, if I say the heroes and villains are inside, I need to make sure I'm doing that internally, number one. Number two, and I've talked to you about this as well, is I'm trying to look for real inspiration and what makes people move. Because I can tell you a long, long list of things, of excuses that we've got as humans that we won't move, insecurity being under most of them. And one insecurity, to be fair, it's also an insecurity that I think I've been toying with the idea of is legacy. This idea of legacy. People think about, what they've done in their time. So as you ask me what my next steps are, I guess you're asking me about my legacy. My answer is I'm thinking about other people's legacies. And I'm thinking about what might make somebody, with all the perverse incentives that there are in the world to make this decision or that, what might make a legacy for someone. I'd like to whisper in, President Trump's ear, your legacy is not out of reach, in the hope that will move him to do whatever he needs to do to the best of his abilities, right? And that will go for any other world leader. That will go for any leader of a corporation. That will go for any teacher in a classroom. Like, what's your legacy? And that could be lived out daily. So it's really not something I've been waiting for. It's funny, my mum used to say, when are you going to consolidate all this knowledge? And it's a fair question because you can't be running around being nosy and greedy for life. But what I've realized is, as long as I try to grab those lessons, be a quick study, grab those lessons and apply them daily. As I say, I might be at some lofty conference about corporate executives, but I'm using that information as soon as I come home with my poor children and my husband. They're my guinea pig. But certainly trying to ask myself first. And again, I'll say something my mum used to say. She'd say, well, you point one finger, but there's always three pointing back. And so metaphorically, it's a really check yourself and check how this works for you. Go and try out the things you think might work yourself. And then the beauty of that is if you're lucky, you'll have stories to tell, right? So as a guide, you will be able to do that storytelling piece. So back to that comment, the whispering of your legacy is not out of reach. I am currently writing a book with that title. And I'm leveraging the clues that I've been found from other people's successes. Maybe some of my stories, but mainly other people, people that have decided to live their legacy. And that, that doesn't just mean making money. It means making money in a way that they feel proud of. That doesn't mean helping other people necessarily. It means helping themselves to grow so that they can give back to others. So I'm looking for those stories. I'm looking for ways to inspire. And writing the book is just hopefully the beginning of that. It consolidates the ideas for me. And then if I'm lucky, I get to go out and evangelize these things. We'll see.
I love that. And I think there's a really interesting thing in your Mum's comment about when are you going to consolidate this stuff, because I think that's a very logical question, right? Because if you're continually gathering stuff, when does it become something?
Right.
And the bit I'm struggling with a little bit now is to say, well, I think the path that I'm on now, where I've permitted myself to be curious, and I mean curious in both senses of the word, weird and inquisitive, I'm going to constantly be gathering things, and I'm constantly sort of pulling things together that I'm not sure, in the same way that I don't think I'm ever going to retire because I'm doing something I love doing at the moment. I don't think I'm ever going to stop wanting to learn or stop. And so I don't think the book is ever going to be, the proverbial book is ever going to be finished, or the mission's going to be over. It's just kind of going to evolve over time. And in a way that sort of bothers me, because, well, wouldn't it be nice to have something to sort of hit, chapter closed or whatever? But actually, I kind of think the world doesn't operate on that basis. And I think part of the thing I've been embracing is that you'll never know everything. I'll never work out exactly what my business is, because I keep shifting and pivoting and moving, and I'll never work out exactly what I want to do. And so I love this idea of we look for sort of closure and certainty and answers to things, and they're just not available. But I
No,
love the idea of finding, what I think we have to do, to your point, is find ways that we need, writing a book is, I think one of the reasons writing a book is interesting is because you hand something in. It's almost like a child, like, I'll hand the essay in, right? But it's also, it's a staging post in a world that often, particularly if you're working for yourself or doing interesting things as you do, some of those traditional staging posts of promotions or whatever, and we can find other things, having kids or whatever will be another form of staging post in there. But it's really interesting that we look for those things, and actually sometimes they're just not available. And we
that's
have to
right.
make do with what we have.
That's right. No, that's a really good point you're making. It makes me think too about what various staging posts might be. And, traditional milestones aren't what we're talking about. We're not talking about, graduate, get your first job, first house, first kid. That's not what we're talking about at all. We're talking about legacy milestones. Um, so, I like to think of it. I mentioned the relay race. So I think, the only milestone we know is coming at some point is death. Sorry to be morbid.
Yeah.
And so for me, that might be the handover point, right? There may be many handovers and many mini relay races within it, but that might be the handover point. And the books sometimes feel like a way of doing that. And I'll give you one sense of story about the reason that's on my mind. So my mum was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma about 10 years before. She had 10 years to live, and she was told she had 10 years to live, and she lived 10 years more. She lived magnificently with the disease, but the year before she died, I didn't do this on purpose, but the year before she died, I gifted her something from Storyworth, which was every week she'd be asked a question and she could tell stories and write them down. So she did it religiously for 1 year. The sad part of the story is she put the book down on February 14th, the pen down after a full year of writing, and then she died within 3 weeks. I was like, oh. But also the doctor gave her that time too. But anyway, luckily, again, just to finish the story out for detail, she died March 7th of 2020, so just before the pandemic. So we were lucky to have had a funeral with her and everything and spend the last days with her. But this book is now stories that, gosh, I didn't ask my mum all those stories for the whole 40 whatever years I was on the planet. I only got those written down in the last year of her life. And that's something, isn't it? I'm not saying it's the pinnacle. It's not everything. Some people write 18 books and they're still never finished. But certainly it is one form of consolidation. I'm so grateful that her family and my children, her grandchildren, have those stories to leverage. I have those stories to leverage in my future writing. And that's one thing that occurred to me as I'm doing my reading now, and my mum's not with me, I'm like, oh, Mum must have read this, because I recognize what my mum did in these books. But again, we didn't have those conversations, right? So writing is one, conversations is another. And we talked about keynote speaking isn't an ego trip. Maybe it will pay some money. Maybe it's nice to be on a stage, but it's about connection. It's about having those conversations with more and more people. And, like you might get the stage to say it to the audience, but they will come back to you and tell you their stories too. So that's part of the way I want to live my life, is like, make sure I'm still sharing stories, whether of my families or other families. That's one thing. And then another piece, this idea of never finished. I've actually just finished reading a book entitled Never Finished. So I highly recommend it. David Goggins, I hope your readers, if they don't know who he is, I didn't know who he was until I went to a conference where I met him, I saw him speak. And he really does lean into this idea of you're never finished. This gentleman has done so many feats, Guinness World Records with pull-ups, ultra marathons and more, cycling. But the point is he's taking his body to the edge of possibility. And that's not for everybody, but the philosophy behind it is he will never be finished. I mean, the joy is in doing that and looking for it. And if we can take human potential to the next level, we can unlock human potential. I'm really excited, by the way, about AI, because if AI can take care of some of the stuff we get paid to do, then we really have no excuses but to unlock the next level of human potential, whether it's discretion, ideation, whatever it might be, judgment. And so if we can all together move ourselves along, I've always been fascinated by this idea that we only use a certain percentage of our brain. So what else is there? Let's go, right? Let's go to 11% this decade. If we can do that, we leave a legacy for our children, our grandchildren to take that baton and move forward. So
I love that. My theory on we only use X% of our brain is I've always wondered what happens if that's wrong, right? So imagine that actually we are almost at full capacity, and I think about it in terms of memory. So imagine like you're suddenly you reach full capacity, right? And a song lyric that's got into your head dislodges your name from the memory banks, right? We're full. We shove it out. And I've just after thought, we just take that thing. I have no idea if there's any scientific basis to it, but I love it because we all know that. Right.
yeah.
It's sort of this thing that gets passed out. I have no idea whether that's actually
Well,
correct. It feels sort of right. And I'm sure there is some research to back it up, but
it'll
who
be a
knows?
good song lyric, and we can rename you any day. So I'm not worried about that. I can't wait to find out. If my legacy is being the first human whose brain actually explodes from overuse, great. That's not a problem. But look, back to the using David Goggins as an example. I mean, this is not him, but there were, I guess, the 4-minute mile. Somebody did the 4-minute mile, and then all of a sudden, lots of people did the 4-minute mile, right? I mean, I think the whole point of Guinness World Records is somebody does it, and then other people go and do it more. So we don't realize the limits of human potential. Like, I'm not talking personally about my physical potential. I mean, if I'm lucky, I'll get fit this decade. But there, whatever it is that moves you, what could you do? I deign to ask the people in positional power right now, with all the resources in the world. I'm sure I would be frustrated in their position if I wanted to do something and I hadn't found a way. And I don't doubt that the people that we think are sitting there on their riches, sunning themselves, are actually thinking about that. It's like, oh, now that I've reached the pinnacle of growth, now that I've got so much money that I don't know what to do with it, what can I do with it, right? And what, whether it's the money or your brain power, your brain trust, or the people around you, why wouldn't we spend a little bit of our time, our disposable time, to leverage that talent and leverage that trust and see what we can push forward? So I don't know. That's what gets me up out of bed in the morning. I'm kind of excited to see what's next. Back to nosy and greedy. Why not?
I love that. And yeah, exactly. Why not? Why not? Before I forget, we've talked about your second podcast. We should also talk about your first, just to get that out there
Okay.
so listeners are aware of it. So tell us about that.
So I was invited to be a co-host on Great Women in Compliance. I think it's about 5 years running now. I've done the last year and a bit, and it was established by Tom Fox of the the Compliance Podcast Network, and he invited Mary Shirley and Lisa Hunt. No, you're Hunt.
Lisa, fine.
Fine, thank you. See, no space in the brain. Lisa Vine and Mary Shirley to set up this podcast for the women in compliance community. We have some great gentlemen in compliance. You may have been one of them. If you're not, you'll be on the roster. But it's just a really wonderful space. Obviously, the podcast, you get to hear from different women in compliance at all levels, all industries. But really, what it's turned into as well as a community. So back to that idea of together we can do hard things well. We've talked about how hard our role is, right? What we're trying to manage and juggle here. I'm not saying that to pat us on the back, but literally we've got regulators, bosses, above us, and a whole employee base that might be wondering what on earth we're trying to make them do next. And so to do that well, we've all got what's between our two ears, but it's much better to get together and think about how we could do that well. And many of us, as you know, are sole practitioners in our functions or with very, very small teams. And so it's really important to have these people to get together, to commune and to riff off. So really wonderful. I encourage your listeners to look at Great Women in Compliance on Corporate Compliance Insights as our producer, so our sponsor. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. And again, the first time you do a podcast, you'll probably be truly awful, right? As with everything. But I was asked, I knew I was nervous. I had never done a podcast before, but I was like, here you go again, Hemma. Opportunity of a lifetime to do something you're really scared of and have a go. And people will be generous and they will forgive you if you're rubbish to begin with, but you will only get better if you do it a few times.
I heard a brilliant thing about podcasts this morning where somebody went, the difference between a podcast and, like, say, doing radio, for example, is that podcasts, right, you start out with nothing. There is no audience. And so you have to build that audience over time. So by default, you're building the audience while you're improving. So by the time you get the big audiences, you do know what you're doing.
There we go.
As opposed to radio, right, where you're straight out there with the audience and you can ruin it. So I love that kind of positive way of looking at the development thing. Now, I think it, like, the way you talk is you're always really engaging and enthusiastic and excited. So I'm delighted, one, that you've done that, because I think you are a great woman in compliance. But the second thing is I'm delighted that you've also branched out to do your own, because I think having your own vehicle to share those thoughts and take it wherever you want to take it, I think is a fantastic way of doing that. And I love the way you've corralled people from different experiences. Thank you for having me on. I don't know why I belong in that crowd, but I'll take I'll take the gang. To finish this off, Hemma, give us one. We're at sort of the start of the year now. Give us a hope for the year ahead.
Oh, gosh, that's a difficult one. Putting me on the spot now. A hope. Well, so a hope for me is that I operationalize my intentions because I've got a long list of them. I know you've talked about the scourge of New Year's resolutions and how they just don't work because motivation is not enough and it comes in spikes. But certainly that's a hope for myself that I've got, a list as long as my arms of things I want to do to enrich my life and those around me. And I think, so my hope for your listeners as well, my listeners would be the same. It's like, turn down the noise inside your head that says you can't and you won't and you shouldn't and not yet and maybe tomorrow. And just try a few things that you've been wanting to do, right? Bucket list that stuff, right? There's no time like the present because you've got to do 2025's bucket list to get to 2026's bucket list. And I don't think we should wait. I don't know what we were waiting for, but life is short for sure. It's easy to say that, but the possibilities are truly endless. And that is agnostic as to who you are and your means and your resources. Like, find something you care about and just do one thing, one more thing that you're doing right now to fulfill that. And I guarantee you that sense of agency and that sense of yes, you can. Your legacy is not out of reach. It's going to be really fulfilling. And I've enjoyed it myself. I'm feeling really good about that. No matter what other insecurities I might have in the world, that's one thing that I know I can control. And so I would encourage your listeners to do the same. Just pick a thing and go for it.
Amazing. I think that's a fabulous, uplifting, very you way to close out the show. So, Hemma, listen, firstly, thank you just for being there and great conversations we've had, and we're going to have a load more. I'm absolutely sure. I will put links to all the things you talked about, where there are links that make sense, in the show notes. But other than that, I'd encourage people to get in touch with you and share ideas and thoughts with you, because you're somebody that just buzzes with energy and amazing ideas. But above all, thank you for being an amazing guest on the show.
Brilliant. I appreciate you. Thanks so much.
So that's it for this episode of the Human Risk Podcast. My enormous thanks to Hemma for appearing and to you for listening. To find out more about Hemma, her podcast, and the things that we talked about on the show, have a look in the show notes. There are links to those there. If this is your first time listening to Human Risk Podcast, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. You can subscribe wherever you get your quality audio content. It's available on all of the major podcasting platforms. To discover some of the more than 300 episodes of the show that you might have missed, visit the show's website, which is humanriskpodcast.com. If you like the show and have yet to leave a review for it, please do so on whichever platform you listen to it on. It really, really does help. I will be back very soon with another episode of this show. But in the meantime, stay safe, see if you can find the edge of your possible, and thank you so much for listening.